my treadmill. Unexpectedly find myself back in the mainland. My whirlwind Hawaii romance did not work out. And so I am here in an Airbnb in Los Angeles temporarily while I figure out kind of as a staging ground to figure out where I'm heading off to write my next book in 2021. Normally I'm restricted to cities with big airports because I travel so much. But now, since no one's traveling much anymore, I can live anywhere. So with a good internet connection. So if anyone has any good housing leads for a book retreat, I'm thinking Austin, Seattle, who knows? But I can go anywhere. So let me know if there's a quiet place with good internet you'd recommend. And maybe I'll write my next book in your hometown or hamlet or city or who knows. By next month, hopefully, my next month's live Q&A, hopefully I'll be back on my treadmill and know where I'm going to be in the near future. Anyway, for those of you unfamiliar with my work, every year I read through every issue of every English language nutrition journal in the world. So busy folks like you don't have to. I compile the most interesting, most groundbreaking, most practical findings, new videos and articles I upload nearly every day to my nonprofit site, NutritionFacts.org. Everything on the website is free. There are no ads, no corporate sponsorships, strictly non-commercial, not selling anything, just put it up as a public service, as a labor of love, as a tribute to my grandmother, whose own life was saved with evidence-based nutrition. All right, let's get to your questions, shall we? All right. See, at the beginning, there's so few, the questions aren't coming in at such a rapid rate. I can actually pick and choose. There they go. I was going to pick and choose, but now they're flooding in so much. I just have to do my roulette wheel and click on one, and we'll see what pops up in the feed. All right. Nutrack asks, am I familiar with Gardein products? And if you are they any good? Yeah, so Gardein is a manufacturer of plant-based meats. Famous, I think, for their plant-based chicken products. And so I view these plant-based meats. I did a whole webinar on it. I have a whole series of videos coming up on it as great stepping stone foods. Not everyone can go kale quinoa overnight, but for someone who wants to eat healthier but wants the same texture and mouthfeel and a familiar taste that they've grown up with, that's where I see the role of things like the Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat and all these things coming in, helping people transition towards a healthier diet. Though I wouldn't want people to kind of to stop there, to stall there, and continue to improving healthier, to improve the healthfulness of their diet by eating as many whole, unprocessed plant foods as possible. Next up, Danielle asked, new articles published. Epic Oxford. This is a quite new article. Oh, well, maybe news articles in the news, but the new article in the peer-reviewed medical literature on bone fractures in vegans came from the Epic Oxford study recently, I think 1 or 2 days ago. It's a fantastic study. I have a lot of respect for those investigators. It's often studies often criticized because they're looking at a cohort of British vegans. This is the second largest study of vegans in human history. But in the UK, if you do surveys, the number one reason people eat plant-based is for like animal welfare reasons rather than health. Whereas here in the US, where, for example, the largest study of vegans is taking place, the Adventist II study, people tend to, start cutting down on meat, et cetera, because of for personal health reasons. So over in the UK, the vegans in this study are eating kind of junky diets because they're really not caring about their own health. They're just kind of thinking about kind of animal suffering concerns. But that criticism only goes so far because the study, it's not like the meat eaters aren't eating crap too. And so it's comparing people eating crappy diet of processed foods with or without meat, eggs, and dairy. And so you can see, what does that do? Does adding meat, eggs, and dairy to crappy processed foods, how much does that impinge on one's health? One just can't extrapolate the disease outcomes of that group of vegans to people who are eating more whole food, plant-based diets, who, people who are actually eating their vegetables. And it's interesting, the Adventist 2 study is actually the reverse. It's everybody's eating healthy. And so it's like, what if you actually compare people who actually eat their vegetables or eat their vegetables plus meat, eggs, and dairy? And so then again, you can compare the vegan sperm meat eaters in the same kind of cohort and see, what does adding meat, eggs, and dairy to an overall healthier diet or an overall kind of standard Western diet, in the case of Epic Oxford. And so, but again, you can't necessarily extrapolate the disease outcomes. So, the Adventist 2 study, vegans have so much less cancer, but they're also eating healthier. So, you can't just eat vegan donuts all day and think you're going to be protected from cancer necessarily. Anyway, so, but Epic Oxford, I actually just, a couple of weeks ago, finished a video series on bone health in vegans. This is, of course, before this new study came out. Epic Oxford had some preliminary data on bone fracture years ago, and found, before we get to the fracture data, if you look at the bone mineral density of vegans versus meat eaters, it's lower bone mineral density, but that difference disappears when you control for body mass index. Let me explain what that means. So heavier people have stronger bones. Why? Because they do weight-bearing exercise walking across the living room, right? It's use it or lose it. Your skeleton is constantly remodeling. And if you if you go out jogging, you do some impactful, you bear some weight on it, your skeleton gets stronger. So being overweight is like having a 50-pound backpack on all day long. If you had a 50 or 100 extra pounds on your back all day long, your skeleton would get really strong. And so that's why, in general, regardless of what you eat, those who are obese can have higher bone mineral density. Also, having all that excess fat for women, for men too, increases estrogen levels, and estrogen makes for stronger bones. That's why women going through menopause accelerate the loss of their bone mass, because they have less estrogen. But obese women have higher estrogen levels in their blood because there's an enzyme in the fat tissues that produces estrogen, which is bad for breast cancer risk, but kind of good for bone health. Finally, if you just having extra padding, right? It's harder to break your hips if you have a lot of padding between your bone and the sidewalk if you accidentally fall. So there are a number of reasons why people who are overweight, obese, have less, hip fracture rates, for example. If you compare vegans tend to be so slender on average. But if you compare meat eaters and vegans at the same weight, then indeed the difference in bone mineral density disappears. So the only reason they have lower bone mineral density is because they're so slender overall. So in the original Epic Oxford, the vegans had higher fracture rates, mostly actually wrist fractures. Part of that is not necessarily osteoporotic bone, but people who are more active tend to have more risk fractures because they're out playing tennis and stuff, and are active individuals. And so vegans are both slender and so healthy, they're out there, they're active, maybe they're more likely to injure themselves and break a bone, as opposed to like vertebral fractures or hip fractures, which tend to be less kind of injury related or activity related, physical activity related, more having to do with having excessively porous bone. But Epic Oxford actually controlled for physical activity levels and still found higher fracture rates among vegans, but that difference disappeared when you control for calcium. So vegans who were getting more than 525 milligrams of calcium a day did not have higher rates of bone fracture. And so, this is a video I did a long time ago saying we just have to make sure we get enough calcium. Where do you get plant-based sources of calcium? almonds and sesame seeds and tofu and calcium fortified plant-based milks. The healthiest source though is dark green leafy vegetables. That's where the cows get their calcium from, but you don't have to eat grass, kale, collards, bok choy, any of the dark green leafies, with the exception of spinach, beet greens, and Swiss chard. Fantastic foods, but a little stingy with their calcium. But so anyway, eat your greens. Okay, but the new Epic Oxford study, they still found excess fracture rates even after controlling for exercise and even after controlling for calcium intake, and even after controlling for bone mineral density. So the question is, okay, now what's going on? So definitely have to go back and redo the video series just because that was done before. But the videos aren't even up yet, so that's perfect. And I'm happy to always go back when that's the whole point of science is to update with new data. And so so there's a number of hypotheses that the investigators reached out. So for example, protein intake, IGF-1, this cancer promoting growth hormone, is when you eat a lot of protein, you increase your IGF-1 levels, and so you can increase certain types of cancer. But it is a growth hormone and can cause bone growth as well. But that's unlikely to be the case because plant-based protein associated with much stronger bones than animal. So plant-based protein like beans associated with much denser bones, stronger bones than animal-based protein like meat. So that doesn't seem to make sense. What about vitamin K? Well, vitamin K comes from dark green leafy vegetables, but that's vitamin K1. There's another type of vitamin K called vitamin K2. That's found mostly in animal products like meat and dairy. Could that be what's going on? Well, there's actually never been good evidence that there's any difference between the activities of K1 and K2. So K1 should do everything that K2 does, but it doesn't matter. Why? Because we make all the K2 we want. The only reason the cow has K2 is because the cow makes K2, and and because they're mammals. And guess what? We're mammals too. And we make K2. We have an enzyme discovered in 2010 that just creates K2. No reason to take vitamin K2. And so that's not the problem either. Probably more likely vitamin D. So this was in Great Britain, and we like to get our vitamin D levels up to about probably ideally 75 nanomoles per liter, which is like 30 nanograms per milliliter, depending on what kind of units you use. And vegans totally nail that in the summer. It's the sunshine vitamin. But during the winter months, and we're creeping into that, vegans dip down. In the UK, they're at such a high latitude, the sun's rays are at such an angle that vegans dip down like below 40. So that's like less than like 15 nanograms per milliliter. And that's because they're not eating food sources of vitamin D like oily fish. And there's just not a lot of sun around. So that's why it's important for those getting inadequate sun exposure. Look, doesn't matter where you could live in Phoenix if you never go outside, right? Then you need to get vitamin D from somewhere. And so the vegans are dipping low enough during the summer months on vitamin D that may play a role. Although at the same time, if you do randomized controlled trials giving people vitamin D and increasing levels, you don't see a benefit in fracture risk. So then that would kind of argue against the vitamin D hypothesis. However, you give them calcium and vitamin D together, you can decrease fracture rates. So it may actually be a combination of the fact that vegans in Great Britain dip too low during the winter months and may have inadequate calcium intake. And that combination is what's causing these excess fractures. Or it could actually be B12. There's a recent systematic review. They don't supplement organic foods in the UK by law with B12. That's like an added artificial things, and by organic standards over there, like the soy milk and plant-based meat and things that would normally have B12 here in the States doesn't have any B12. And so if you're not supplementing it, you're probably not getting it. And so the vitamin B12 deficiency rates among vegans in London is really off the charts. It's really, they need to do a better job over there, getting people eating plant-based diets to take the B12. But this latest systematic review on B12 and bone suggests it's really kind of complicated, the relationship between bone and B12. But complicated is my middle name. That's what you pay me for. That's what you make donations to NutritionFacts.org, the 501c3 a nonprofit, to do the deep digging and figure out. So I'm going to do a deep dive, just like I did with the stroke data, and to come up with serious videos and figure out what's going on with the new data. And then I'll get it out to you so we can all be healthy. Okay, next question. John asks, I've been in your program for 6 weeks, getting off a blood pressure medication slowly, fantastic, lost 5 pounds, but now have plateaued on beta blockers in terms of, it's one of the blood pressure kind of medications. So I would encourage, so the first thing I think of is excess sodium intake. So you can eat plant-based, but still get excess sodium, because so many basically almost anything in a can or a box or a bag, processed foods has a lot of salt added to it as a taste enhancer. So I'd encourage you to hit the American Heart Association's recommended 1,500 milligrams of sodium limit, which means basically really cutting out processed foods. And I bet your blood pressure will drop to reflect your new, healthier diet. I have some videos coming up on potassium salt, potassium chloride, and whether or not that, there's a number of salt substitutes on the market, whether that's a good alternative. And spoiler alert, yes, it is. Actually, not just maybe neutral or harmless, but actually helpful, actually beneficial, because many of us don't get enough potassium. But there's a very important caveat. You have to have the kidneys to handle it, your kidneys. If you have ailing kidneys, kidney dysfunction, kidney failure, you can these salt substitutes are too high in potassium. So, but lots more details coming up in that video. So I think I have a whole series of videos coming out. I've been buffering videos like crazy because I have to come up with a whole year's worth of videos because I got to write the next book. And so I've got just all sorts of juicy stuff coming up for you. All right, next up. Annette is just replying to somebody. Adele. Spoilers. Yes, indeed. Uninaut asks, should you wait 30 minutes to an hour before or after eating a meal to drink matcha tea for? Oh, that's a great question. Although, I'll read the whole question just in case. I don't know, you're listening to this as some kind of podcast in the car or something. But for those of you who can't see the screen here, it says, should you wait 30 minutes to an hour before and after eating a meal to drink matcha green tea for optimal nutrient absorption? What we're concerned about is iron absorption. Any kind of tea, doesn't have to be green tea, black tea, any of the teas will do it. In fact, coffee does it too, though tea is worse. And indeed, you should not drink tea with meals. 30 minutes to an hour before, absolutely. Probably even longer afterwards. It can take hours for your stomach to empty, and you really don't want tea in your stomach at the same time as iron-rich foods because it'll actually bind up the iron and will inhibit its absorption. So no tea with meals. Drink it before, let your stomach drain, and then wait a few hours afterwards to resume your tea habit. Same thing with coffee, but just not as bad. I have some videos coming up on that too. Okay, is fish oil issued with a certificate of analysis proves that there's no PCBs, mercury and dioxins, a safe source of DHA. Many of these so-called certificates are just bogus. They're not third-party, independent. The own company certifies itself, which is kind of slimy. There's certainly, so there's the problem, there's distillation techniques where you can distill out some of the heavy metals, but unfortunately, many of the pesticides and some of the lighter industrial toxins just spill over. And so even when you do actually look into distilled fish oil, you still see pollutants. Unfortunately, you just can't get away from it and still make an affordable supplement. So, and the question is like, why would you need fish oil in the first place? There are pollutant-free, completely pollutant-free sources, algae-based, EPA, DHA, or your own body can make some from the short-chain omega-3s you get in walnuts and flax seeds and hemp seeds and chia seeds, etc. All right. Thank you, Vladimir, for that question. Next up, ME asked, is an iodine supplement needed if you eat iodized salt already? No, you probably, if you eat iodized salt, like typical people eat salt, you probably getting enough iodine. First of all, you should make sure it's iodized. You should look at the ingredient list. Only about half the salt is iodized, and pretty much all the salt used commercially, like in restaurants and processed foods, is not iodized. Sea salt tends to be not iodized. All those fancy, silly salts like Himalayan sea salt and stuff, not iodized. But I don't think you should eat any iodized salt. Why? Because you shouldn't eat salt. If you do eat salt, definitely do iodized. Easy way to get iodine. But we shouldn't be eating salt because sodium is the number one dietary risk factor for death on the planet Earth. Worst thing about humanity's diet is excess sodium, not only because it increases the risk of high blood pressure and heart disease, kidney disease, on down the list. Anyway, so where do you get your iodine from? The healthiest source is sea vegetables like nori, or those nori sheets you can chew on them as snacks. So 2 a day, get all the iodine you need. What's like a half? I forget. You'd have to look at the video. I think it's like a half teaspoon of dulse or aramay, really mild seaweeds for people that don't like the seaweedy taste, or like a spoonful of wakame, what you make seaweed salad with, or something like that. Those would be the healthiest sources of iodine. And then there's iodine in foods grown on the ground, but it depends what kind of soil iodine levels there are. So you want to get a reliable source, particularly if you're pregnant. So critically important that all prenatal vitamins have iodine, and they don't, which is ridiculous. So make sure your prenatal has iodine, critically important for all pregnancies make sure you have enough iodine. Okay, next up. And the only reason that iodine, another thing they should do, sorry, Angelica, I'll get to your question in a second. Another on iodine. So there's iodine in cow's milk because they use iodine-containing disinfectants like betadine kind of thing to disinfect the teats, and it kind of leaches into the milk. And they can give iodine supplements directly to the cow. But I urge all plant-based milk companies out there to add iodine. So why isn't they're already adding iodine via the udders to dairy milk? Why not add it to soy milk and almond milk and all the milks out there? And I just haven't seen it, which is unfortunate. So I don't know why that's happening. But if you out there and you work for a plant-based milk company and you want to have a competitive advantage, I will plug your milk if you put some iodine in it and make it a convenient source for people. Anyway, okay, Angelica, history of blood clots and transitioning to plant-based foods. If you, I'm not sure what your question is, but if you are on a blood thinning medication called Coumadin, generic name warfarin, then you need to make sure your doctor titrates the levels of that drug to vitamin K rich foods, dark green leafy vegetables, because so vitamin K is important for blood clotting. So you take a drug that blocks vitamin K, the action of vitamin K, and so then your blood's really thin. But if all of a sudden you eat a big spinach salad and you have so much vitamin K that your drug dose is too low, then all of a sudden your blood can clot again. So if you have a clotting disorder, that can be bad. In which case, it's not like you shouldn't eat those greens. You should just make sure you eat the same amount of greens every day and have your doctor titrate up the dose so it optimally blocks. And then you get all the benefits of greens at the same time. Best of both worlds. Next up, Gretchen says all of us need to plant the seed with plant-based. Oh, great. Oh, I love it. Oh, thank you, Gretchen. Yes. contact your local. So like silk soy milk. Actually, I talked to a scientist there. They actually credited me for getting rid of their carrageenan, which used as a thickener. And so I put out a video saying I'm concerned about carrageenan for people with inflammatory bowel diseases. And it still got a carrageenan, and they actually told me, oh, we got some video. So I'm hoping my iodine video gets them to add some iodine. Maybe there's some technical reason why they don't, or I don't know. I don't know much about food science. All I can tell you, it'd be good for nutrition. Okay, Nicholas says, have I heard about using Chaparral with high biofilm to treat lupus and viruses? I don't even know what Chaparral is. So I'm sorry, I can't help you. Is that a supplement? Is that a plant? Let me know and I will do my best to answer. Okay, oat milk. Salvatore likes oat milk. Maria says, is it right that when you eat animal products, you consume antibiotics and weakening your body? Someone said that when you heat antibiotics, it doesn't work no more, so it doesn't matter if you consume it that way. There are antibiotic residues found in meat. The primary problem with the use of antibiotics in animal agriculture is it fosters the growth of antibiotic-resistant bugs that can then, and so that's the biggest threat, that you'll get some antibiotic-resistant infection either from meat products or from someone who eats meat or from manure runoff. Or there's all sorts of ways these antibiotic-resistant bacteria can infect people regardless of what they eat. So that's the primary problem. But there are antibiotic residues found in the antibiotics themselves. But what effect that has on the microbiome or on human health in general, it remains an open question. But if there's any about that, I'll do videos about it. Okay, next up. NK says, what B12 supplement brand do you recommend? So I'm glad that NK specified cyanocobalamin, because that's the best form, because it's the most shelf-stable form. And what's the brand? So I recommend you, in terms of supplements in general, you can see if they have something called Good Manufacturing Practices seal. That at least meets some kind of minimal standards in terms of supplement manufacturing, but ideally it would be UPC certified, which is a third-party certifier that actually goes and makes sure that what's in the bottle is actually what's on the label is actually what's in the pill. Now, it doesn't mean it's good for you. I mean, so just because that's on a supplement doesn't mean you should take that supplement, but it just says that there's truth in advertising, right? That it says this much B12 and that's how much the pill has. And so that would be the best. So I know, so there's a couple different brands that do that. You just have to look at the actual bottle. I think the one brand's called Nature's Made. Another one's called a Kirkland brand, which is like the Costco brand. I think is UPC certified. You'll see the little circle, little seal on those products. And then you just know that you're actually getting B12. Okay. Oh, dudes, you are serious? That was quick. All right, let me run through a few things. You say, well, wait a second, I want to ask more questions. You didn't get to my question. Don't worry. Why? Because tonight, at 8 o'clock Eastern time, 5 o'clock my time, now then Pacific, I'm doing an Instagram Live with none other than the phenomenal Vasanto Molina, one of my favorite dietitians in the whole wide world, in Instagram Live. So you got to go to Nutrition Facts Instagram page, 8 p.m. tonight. Ask all your questions, and you'll not just have my brain answering, but you'll have Vasanto's brain. And between both, and so I'm going to learn just as much as you because she's amazing. Okay, so that's more questions. You can also obviously, oh no, not follow you, unfollow us. So there's the Instagram account. Make sure to subscribe to NutritionFacts.org free newsletter. Find us on Facebook, YouTube. Where's YouTube? YouTube. There's YouTube. Follow us on Twitter. And if you are on YouTube right now, you can make sure you don't miss any of our videos. There should be a little bell to the right. Is that your right? No, that's your right. Little bell here. Anyway, click that and you'll get notifications. And don't forget, tonight, more questions. Looking forward to it. See you next time, hopefully from a treadmill.